Hello, Steven. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Guy.
A few days ago, we recorded a little bit of an introduction to your long and successful career. And while he was explaining his career, one very important event, which was a kind of a global or a sizable event, was in the time when Steven was at Sony Pictures in November 2014. There was a little incident or a big incident related to an attack which qualified at that time as the biggest corporate attack, I think, in U.S. history. I think that was what Obama was saying at that time, if I get it right. So thanks, Stephen, for having made the time to join and looking forward to hear your insights.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Guy. I think it's important to establish some background on what happened, what we did, how we survived. First of all, I was at Sony Pictures Entertainment, and my job in 2014 was Executive Vice President for all Global Protection Services. So let's go to November 24th in 2014, and we had the first indications that we had been breached. In this case, though, the adversary, which is nation state, didn't want a particular movie to be released. What happened that day, that morning, in my office, is one of my staff came in. They'd taken a screenshot of their computer when they turned it on. What they soon realized is that by being connected, that wiper malware initiated and began to destroy everything on the drive. All of a sudden, we've got a problem. So in Los Angeles, I took the security team and I had them make copies, hard copies, and do desk drops that said, do not turn on your computer. The message had a demand in it, and it had links for URLs where we thought we might be able to communicate. None of them worked, which would indicate there was no real intent to negotiate. So shutting that down helped curtail the damage, or minimize, I would say. Because this was a holiday week, a lot of the decision makers were gone. Oh, and one of the things I didn't mention is one of the areas of responsibility that I had was InfoSec, or information security. I had a CISO who reported to me. He had a team of, I think, 35 people at that time around the world as well. We were in the habit of communicating all the time with our teams. We had already figured out functionally who was responsible for what. And even beyond that, for the rest of the organization, like finance and HR and legal, they knew what their roles were, communications as well. So that helped. We formed the crisis committee, got it going. I realized that there were a couple decisions that needed to be made. We needed help. And my strong recommendation to the CEO and general counsel was that we engage the FBI, because I had been active with the FBI on different programs and associations and memberships. And so that relationship and trust that existed before this incident. And that's really critical for the listeners, that you build those relationships ahead of time and you include that in your contingency plans, because you can't have a debate over who to call on the day that happens. I was able to get consent, and I called the assistant director of the FBI in Los Angeles, and I told him what happened. I said, I want to know from you, what is this going to look like? How are we going to work together? I had that commitment. I went back to the senior management, and they said, okay. And so one of the things that happens in companies today, even now, is there's still a debate with the legal department typically over the issue of legal privilege, and giving up legal privilege by bringing in law enforcement. I can say to this day that no one I know regrets that decision. We worked really well together, and it probably made the difference between whether or not the company survived this or not. And that afternoon, I had 6 cyber agents from the FBI in my office. They were with us for months, And one of the reasons that I did call the FBI was they had the legal attaché program. So currently today in about nearly 100 embassies and consulates around the world, you have people that work for the FBI that are legal attachés that have relationships in those countries and cities with the law enforcement community, the local law enforcement community. What it means is they had relationships. And that made a big, big difference in our ability to get things done. Another decision, day one, that morning, to unplug worldwide. As if there's no connectivity, there wasn't anything they could do from a standpoint of destruction of
Beyond
data.
that point, yeah.
Yeah. So, how do you run your business without being connected? Most people I know do not plan to run their business without a digital support mechanism. And so we didn't have that. What we did have, though, in our labs was connectivity. But the other thing was, how do you get the message out to not only to all your people around the world, but also to those people that were doing productions for television and theatrical in parts of the world where we weren't set up with anything. And so whether it was your mobile device, your laptop, your CPU, it all would have the same problem. And so when email is down, email is down. We had to rethink how we run our business. So the thing I want to be sure to mention here, when you're at a point like this, um, there's two ways to think about it. One is I need to have the right people in the room to manage the crisis. The other one is I need to allow senior management and leadership of the company to continue the business. I believe you have to draw a line, you have to have a distinction between business continuity and crisis response and resilience. In the end, what's important to know here is this foreign adversary, they got in through phishing. So, still today, in major breaches, most breaches, uh, about 85 to 90% still use phishing to get in. So, what happened with us too is that, well, some of it, they did not compromise our email, but there were images of drives that had been taken over time when a new piece of equipment was issued or whatever. And that data, I think, was not encrypted. So they found a way to get access to the email of the top 10 executives in the company, going back up to 12 years. And they started posting this on pastebin sites. That became a whole other issue for us to deal with. It was really bad press. We had to also deal with that in addition to how do we give assurance to our customer base that it's okay to plug back into Sony Pictures. That took quite a long time. The other thing that I want to mention, so by bringing in the FBI, an unintended consequence was that our conversations with media and others about what was going on were very limited. It was a criminal investigation. We were not allowed to talk about it. But one of the things that happened is that when the word got out that we brought the FBI in, it immediately became known on a global basis that a federal law enforcement agency is helping us investigate this matter. And so on December 19th, the President of the United States and the director of the FBI formally made attribution to North Korea. That's pretty powerful. That had never happened before in a cyber breach against a private sector business.
When you mentioned the early days and then the formal announcement in I think December 19th you mentioned, and I guess you had to finally, transition into a certain temporary environment, then finally to the final or rebuilding or reconfiguring or cleaning up and probably building it in a better version later. How long did that take after the
Several weeks. We bought all new equipment and we got rid of the old. we purged them so that the hard drives did not have anything on them, let alone the malware. And then we set up the right protocols for how they would be set up. So, we had hundreds and hundreds of applications. Well, which ones do people really need? And it turns out not everybody needed what they said they needed. And this protocol required supervisory approval, and you had to establish why you needed it. So you have to create um, a pyramid around what's first, second, third, fourth, down to 600, whatever the number is. And if you haven't included something like that in your business impact analysis and your planning, you should. But then imagine if you do that in a functional area in a big department, but now the whole company's down. What that individual thought was number one for him or her might not be number one for the company. But that's really important. The other thing, how do you make payroll when you're no longer connected? And then another one, publicly traded company. We have to account for everything we do every day. And you're going to be audited. How do you do that? Another one, insurance. You've got to track everything you do every moment. So as you know, Guy, I can go on, but these are some important learnings.
I think what is also impressive, I think the Sony Pictures at that time had how many employees? 6,000, 7,000, maybe something like that.
No, about 12,000.
12,000. So it's a much, much bigger number, which, which couldn't do their work in the normal way. So there was,
Right.
and they're not all in one building, even though there's a bigger campus in Culver City,
50
Los
countries.
Angeles. So email or alternative communication, whether it's phone or other forms of communication, must have been very critical to at least make the best out of that situation and kind of have us continuity going, at least in the early days, and then kind of get to a normal functioning condition again. Plus, I know that Sony Pictures had a lot of thousands or more than tens of thousands of third parties which are working to make movies happening. So how did you, maybe my last question, because we're running a bit over time, how did you actually manage that?
What's really important in your planning is what I call trees. So in other words, if let's say I'm the president of international television, and I've got people all over the world. In my hierarchy or my organization, I need to know how to connect not only with my employee base, but also with all of my third-party partners. So they assigned the right people to start, chasing it all down, to find these people, to have the ability to communicate in a different way, to start to think about, again, the continuity of the business. And communication, think about a company our size, as dispersed as it was. You've got to communicate. You can't leave people in the dark. And so that's what we did. We found ways to communicate, including we allowed people to use personal devices. We had to communicate somehow. So, but a lot of people were afraid to use their personal devices that in any way would connect to the workplace because of the malware issue.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there is a lot of uncertainty of what causes exposure, but at least the structural, little bit independent of the personal devices saved you in some sense, because they were typically structurally not so connected. Well, thank you so much, Stevan. I think it's great that you could share this with us, because you have been there. It's not about reading something about something. It's about trying to relive the whole experience to actually get the right insight and have the right motivation to actually learn from this and be prepared as well as possible.
Yeah, it was a good conversation. Thank you, Guy.
Thank you.